In Mississippi, in the year 1845, there lived a woman whose name was spoken softly in drawing rooms and more softly still in the quarters where enslaved people slept. She was born into a family of immense wealth, the kind that did not need to prove itself, the kind that assumed authority as naturally as breathing. From childhood, she was taught that land was power, that people could be owned, and that morality was flexible when wrapped in silk and tradition. Her upbringing was refined, her education unusual for a woman of her time, and her confidence sharpened by the constant reassurance that she was destined to rule. By the time she reached adulthood, she had learned not only how to manage a household, but how to command fear without raising her voice. When her parents died, leaving her one of the largest plantations in the region, many believed she would remarry quickly and hand control to a husband. She did neither. Instead, she shocked society by assuming full authority herself. She attended auctions, negotiated contracts, reviewed ledgers, and disciplined overseers with the precision that unsettled men twice her age. To outsiders, she was composed, graceful, and impeccably dressed, a woman who hosted elegant dinners and spoke intelligently about politics and commerce. Ministers praised her generosity to the church, neighbors admired her refinement, and visiting relatives described her as strong-willed but respectable. Yet, respectability in her world was merely a mask worn to protect darker ambitions. She viewed the plantation not as a home, but as a machine. Every acre, every tool, every human body had a purpose, and sentimentality was in her mind an inefficiency. While other plantation owners spoke of tradition or paternal duty, she spoke of numbers. She studied production charts late into the night, calculating yields and losses with a detached calm. If cotton failed, she blamed weather. If profits dipped, she blamed management. If people broke under the weight of labor, she blamed weakness. Compassion, she believed, dulled authority, and authority was the only language the world respected. From an early age, there were signs that something within her was different. As a girl, she was known for observing rather than playing, for watching people the way one might watch animals, noting habits, vulnerabilities, and reactions. She disliked unpredictability and resented emotional displays she could not control. When servants cried, she dismissed them. When reprimanded, she did not argue, she remembered. By the time she inherited the plantation, these traits had hardened into philosophy. She did not see cruelty as evil, only as necessary. Pain was to her a tool like any other. Her brothers, several years younger, had grown up under her influence. After their parents' deaths, they remained on the plantation, dependent on her generosity and fearful of her disapproval. Though legally adults, they lived under her shadow, aware that inheritance, status, and future prospects rested in her hands. She used this dependence carefully, never openly threatening, but constantly reminding them of what they owed her. She placed them in positions of authority, not out of trust, but control, ensuring that loyalty was enforced through obligation rather than affection. Among the enslaved population, her reputation spread quickly. They noticed how she watched them, how her eyes lingered not with anger, but calculation. Punishments under her rule were not impulsive, they were deliberate, designed to send messages. She did not shout or strike in fits of rage. Instead, she ordered consequences with a quiet voice that terrified more than any whip. Silence followed her footsteps. People learned that pleading was useless, that tears were wasted, and that survival depended on obedience and invisibility. Despite this, she maintained an image of propriety. She donated to charitable causes, welcomed traveling preachers, and spoke publicly of order and Christian duty. When questioned about her strict management, she replied calmly that discipline preserved stability, and stability preserved peace. Few challenged her, for she was wealthy, influential, and female in a society that both underestimated and feared women who wielded power too confidently. Rumors circulated, but proof was scarce, and those who suspected darker truths lacked the courage or standing to confront her. What truly defined her, however, was not simple cruelty, but control. She believed herself uniquely capable of shaping outcomes, of bending fate through will alone. Where others saw the chaos of life, she saw patterns waiting to be enforced. This belief fueled her actions and justified every boundary she crossed. She did not consider herself immoral, she considered herself realistic. In her mind, history favored the decisive, not the compassionate. As the years passed, this mindset deepened. Losses in cotton markets frustrated her, not because of hardship, but because they disrupted her sense of mastery. She refused to accept forces beyond her command. Weather, markets, and human will were obstacles to be managed, not realities to be endured. It was during this period that her thoughts began to turn toward more disturbing solutions, ideas she would not yet speak aloud, but which took shape slowly, nurtured by isolation and unchecked authority. Those closest to her sensed the change. Conversations became colder, decisions became harsher. Where once she calculated profit, she now calculated permanence. She wanted a system that could not fail, one that would expand under her control regardless of external conditions. The plantation was no longer enough. She wanted to redesign the very structure of labor itself. In her private writings, she referred to people as assets, futures, and investments, language stripped of humanity and rich with intent. To the world, she remained a composed Southern lady, a symbol of strength and independence. To those who lived under her rule, she became something else entirely, a presence that lingered even when unseen, a force that shaped every breath and decision. The Macabre Mistress of Mississippi was not born in a single moment of violence, but formed slowly, through privilege without restraint, intelligence without conscience, and power without accountability. By 1845, the foundation of her legacy was already laid, and what followed would reveal just how far a person could fall when no one was left to say no. As the cotton economy wavered and prices shifted unpredictably, her mind turned relentlessly toward the problem of stability. She despised uncertainty more than loss itself. Markets, weather, and politics were forces she could not fully command, and that reality gnawed at her sense of superiority. Night after night, she studied account books by lamplight, fingers tracing columns of figures as if sheer focus might bend them to her will. Each dip in profit felt like a personal insult, a challenge to her authority, and she responded the only way she knew how, by seeking control in places others feared to look. She began to view the plantation not merely as land producing crops, but as a closed system capable of sustaining and expanding itself. To her, the enslaved population represented untapped potential, not in skill or humanity, but in numbers. She noticed births with the same interest she once reserved for harvest yields. Where others saw children as additional mouths to feed, she saw future labor already owned, already calculated. The idea did not arrive suddenly or violently. It emerged quietly, wrapped in logic, justified by arithmetic and ambition. Her journals from that period reflected a disturbing shift in language. Words like care and maintenance gave way to growth and return. She compared the costs of purchasing enslaved people from traders to the expenses of feeding and housing those already on her land. In her calculations, forced reproduction appeared efficient, nearly elegant. No negotiations, no transport risks, no competing buyers, just patience and enforcement. To her, it was not cruelty, but innovation. She studied breeding practices used on livestock with keen interest, questioning overseers about techniques and outcomes. The parallels did not trouble her. In her worldview, hierarchy justified everything. Those beneath her existed to serve her prosperity, and sentimentality was an obstacle she had long since discarded. She convinced herself that the system she envisioned would provide food, shelter, and continuity, cloaking exploitation in the language of order. If people suffered, she reasoned, suffering was already their condition. At first, she tested her theories subtly. She encouraged pairings, rewarded pregnancies with marginal privileges, and punished resistance with quiet severity. The rewards were meaningless, the punishments unforgettable. She observed reactions carefully, adjusting her methods like a scientist refining an experiment. Resistance frustrated her not because of its morality, but because it challenged her assumption that will alone could override human instinct. Each refusal hardened her resolve. As her confidence grew, so did her boldness. What began as suggestion turned into command. Families were rearranged without explanation. Bonds formed naturally over years were severed overnight. Men and women were ordered together like inventory, their fear dismissed as inconvenience. She rationalized these acts by telling herself that attachment bred weakness and that eliminating emotional ties increased productivity. In truth, she resented any loyalty she did not control. Her brothers, tasked with managing daily operations, began to sense the darkness of her vision. They questioned her privately at first, uncomfortable with the direction she was taking. She listened without interrupting, her expression calm, almost amused. When they finished, she reminded them who held the deeds, who controlled the accounts, and who determined their future. Disobedience, she implied, would not be met with anger, but erasure. Their objections faded into reluctant compliance. The enslaved community felt the shift immediately. Fear thickened the air. Women whispered warnings to each other at night. Mothers clutched their children more tightly, and men grew silent, eyes lowered. Love became dangerous. Choice vanished. The most intimate parts of life were no longer private, but regulated. She watched all of this unfold with cold satisfaction, believing she was witnessing the success of her strategy. What made her vision especially chilling was her belief that she was improving the system. She saw herself as a reformer, someone brave enough to do what others would not admit to doing. In her mind, hypocrisy was the true sin. Others exploited enslaved people while pretending to be humane. She embraced the truth of exploitation openly, convinced that honesty absolved her of guilt. This self-justification insulated her from doubt and strengthened her resolve. She began keeping detailed birth records, noting parentage, physical traits, and perceived strength. Children were evaluated early, labeled for future labor roles before they could speak. This record-keeping gave her immense satisfaction. It was proof to her that chaos could be conquered, that life itself could be engineered to serve her ambition. She spoke proudly of efficiency, of foresight, of legacy. Yet beneath this obsession lay something deeper than profit. Control over reproduction granted her dominion over the future itself. She was no longer merely managing labor, she was shaping generations. This realization intoxicated her. It fed a growing belief that she stood above ordinary morality, accountable only to results. Power, in her eyes, justified every means. The plantation changed under this regime. Joy vanished. Music faded. Laughter became rare and dangerous. Even overseers grew uneasy, aware that they were participating in something that would one day be condemned, though none dared say it aloud. Her authority was absolute, her will unquestioned. She moved through the estate like a sovereign, confident that history would remember her success rather than her cruelty. In moments of solitude, she felt no regret. Instead, she felt triumph. The system was working, numbers rising, future labor secured. Each new birth reinforced her belief that she had found a solution others lacked the courage to implement. She did not see the fear in children's eyes as accusation, but as confirmation of obedience. To her, silence meant success. By the end of that year, her twisted vision was fully realized. What began as an economic calculation had become an ideology, one that reduced humanity to arithmetic and pain to policy. The plantation was no longer just a place of forced labor, it was a controlled experiment in domination. And at its center stood a woman utterly convinced of her own righteousness, blind to the suffering she engineered, certain that history itself would bend to her design. The moment her brothers became fully aware of what she expected of them was not marked by shouting or open confrontation. It unfolded quietly, as so many of her most devastating decisions did, in a candlelit room lined with ledgers and legal papers. She spoke calmly, almost casually, as if discussing crop rotation or fence repairs. Her tone carried no malice, only certainty. She explained that the system she had put in place required stricter enforcement, closer supervision, and unwavering loyalty from those closest to her. As she spoke, her eyes never left theirs, measuring not agreement but surrender. They had grown up under the same roof, shared the same tutors, the same privileges, and the same assumptions about the world. Yet even as children, they had known she was different. Where they hesitated, she decided. Where they doubted, she calculated. After their parents' deaths, that difference hardened into dominance. She became the center of their survival, the keeper of inheritance, reputation, and future. By the time she laid out her expectations, they already understood that refusal was not an option. At first, she framed their involvement as administrative necessity. Someone had to enforce rules, to ensure compliance, to manage what she called order. She reminded them that outsiders could not be trusted with such sensitive operations, that family loyalty was essential. The language she used was careful, almost persuasive, cloaked in responsibility rather than command, but beneath the politeness lay an unmistakable threat. Without her favor, they were nothing. One brother attempted a weak objection, muttering about propriety and the judgment of society if word ever spread. She did not raise her voice. She simply asked him who would speak. The enslaved had no voice. Overseers depended on her wages. Neighbors benefited from her trade. Ministers enjoyed her donations. Silence, she explained, was already guaranteed. The world only condemned what it could see, and she controlled what was seen. Their resistance collapsed not in a single moment, but gradually, under the weight of fear and dependency. She assigned them specific roles, each carefully chosen to bind them deeper into her design. One was tasked with overseeing daily compliance, another with record verification, another with discipline. By dividing responsibility, she ensured that no single brother could claim innocence. Each action implicated the others. Guilt became shared, and shared guilt became loyalty. What disturbed them most was not merely the cruelty of the system, but her insistence that they participate directly in its enforcement. She demanded reports, details, confirmation. She corrected their language when they spoke too humanely, reminding them that emotion clouded judgment. When they hesitated to punish resistance, she accused them of weakness, of jeopardizing the future she was building for them all. Shame became her sharpest weapon. Over time, reluctance hardened into routine. What once felt unthinkable became daily labor. They learned to suppress discomfort, to detach from the faces before them, to follow instructions without reflection. Each compromise made the next easier. Each act of compliance pushed the memory of resistance further away. They told themselves they were protecting the plantation, protecting their sister, protecting themselves. In truth, they were protecting nothing but their own survival. The enslaved people noticed the change in the brothers as clearly as they had noticed the change in her. Familiar faces became distant, eyes avoided contact, voices grew harsh. Those who had once shown small mercies now enforced rules with mechanical obedience. Authority, once shared uneasily, became rigid. The brothers were no longer merely overseers, they were extensions of her will, moving pieces in a system designed to erase humanity. At night, when the plantation fell quiet, the brothers were haunted by what they had become. Sleep came poorly. Memories surfaced uninvited. Childhood games, their mother's laughter, sermons about righteousness. These thoughts filled them with a dread they could not speak aloud. To acknowledge guilt would be to invite collapse. So they buried it beneath routine, beneath alcohol, beneath silence. She noticed their inner turmoil and exploited it expertly. When one faltered, she praised another. When guilt surfaced, she reframed it as sacrifice. She spoke of legacy, of survival in a harsh world, of the necessity of strength. Weakness, she reminded them, had destroyed greater men than they. Her words were never cruel, but they were relentless, reshaping conscience into obedience. As months passed, the brothers became trapped in a web of their own actions. Even if they wished to stop, they could not. Too much had been done. Too many orders given, too many lives altered under their authority. They understood, perhaps more clearly than she did, the depth of what they were involved in. But understanding offered no escape. It only deepened their despair occasionally. One would suggest easing enforcement, allowing families small freedoms, loosening control. She dismissed these ideas with thin patience, warning that inconsistency bred rebellion. Order, she insisted, required uniformity. Compassion was unpredictable. Fear was reliable. Her logic was flawless within its own twisted framework, and they had no argument strong enough to break it. The brothers' transformation was not marked by open cruelty, but by absence. Absence of protest, absence of empathy, absence of choice. They became men who followed instructions even when those instructions violated every moral instinct they possessed. In doing so, they surrendered not just their authority, but their identities. They were no longer brothers in a family, they were components in a machine. Among the enslaved, resentment and fear deepened. They understood that appealing to the brothers was useless. Mercy no longer lived there. The last illusion of internal conflict among the masters vanished. Authority became unified, absolute, and impersonal. Resistance became riskier, hope thinner. The system tightened its grip, and life narrowed into survival alone. What made this betrayal of blood so profound was its quietness. There were no dramatic confrontations, no open declarations of evil, just a series of choices made under pressure, each one easier to justify than the last. The brothers did not wake up as monsters. They became them gradually, shaped by fear, greed, and the desire to belong to the side of power rather than be crushed by it. She watched this transformation with satisfaction. To her, it confirmed her belief that loyalty could be engineered, that morality was malleable, and that even family bonds could be bent to serve ambition. The brothers' compliance was proof of her mastery, not just over people she owned, but over those who shared her blood. It was the ultimate demonstration of control. By the time they realized the full cost of what they had done, it was too late. Their names, their actions, and their silence were permanently bound to her legacy. They had become participants in a system that would one day be remembered with horror, even if history never recorded their individual names. In serving her vision, they had forfeited their own redemption, proving that the most devastating betrayals are often committed not by enemies, but by those who choose obedience over conscience. For those forced to live beneath her rule, the transformation of the plantation into a system of absolute control was felt not as a policy shift, but as a slow suffocation. Fear did not arrive suddenly. It crept into daily life, settling into routines, silences, and glances exchanged in passing. The enslaved people understood early that something fundamental had changed. The rhythms of labor grew harsher. Rules multiplied, and punishments became precise and unavoidable. It was not chaos they faced, but a chilling order that left no room to breathe. Families were the first to fracture. Bonds that had been forged over years of shared survival were severed without warning. Mothers woke to find children reassigned to distant quarters. Husbands and wives were separated under the justification of efficiency. Questions were met with silence. Pleas were ignored. The uncertainty was often worse than the loss itself. Not knowing when another separation might come turned every moment of love into a risk. Women bore a particular weight under this regime. Their bodies were no longer their own, even in the most basic sense. Privacy vanished, choice vanished, pregnancy became a condition monitored and managed by others, stripped of dignity and meaning. Fear followed them constantly, not only for themselves, but for the lives they carried and the futures awaiting the children. Joy, when it came, was quiet and guarded, shared only in whispers after nightfall. Men, too, felt their identities erode. Unable to protect their families, many retreated inward, their silence mistaken for submission. Strength became dangerous, leadership a liability. Any sign of resistance invited swift and calculated punishment. The loss of agency was total. Work was no longer just forced labor. It was a daily reminder of powerlessness, reinforced by overseers who carried out orders without hesitation or mercy. Children grew up faster than they should have. They learned early not to cry loudly, not to ask questions, not to draw attention. Innocence did not survive long in an environment where fear was constant and affection dangerous. They watched adults closely, mimicking caution and restraint before they fully understood why such vigilance was necessary. Childhood became preparation for endurance. Despite the oppression, small acts of humanity persisted. Quiet songs hummed under breath, hands squeezed in reassurance when no one was watching. Stories shared at night kept memory alive. These moments did not change their circumstances, but they preserved something essential within them. The mistress believed she had eliminated emotion from her system, but she underestimated the resilience of the human spirit. Even under crushing control, people found ways to remember who they were. Rumors of what happened on the plantation traveled slowly beyond its borders. Nearby enslaved communities sensed the darkness, though few knew its full extent. Some overseers spoke in hushed tones, traders avoided prolonged visits, ministers who once praised her order left uneasy, unable to reconcile what they sensed with the image she presented. Still, fear and profit kept most mouths shut. Silence protected cruelty. Within the quarters, grief became a shared language. OSS was so common it no longer shocked, yet it never numbed completely. Each separation reopened wounds. Each punishment reinforced the knowledge that their lives were governed by a will indifferent to suffering. Anger simmered beneath the surface, restrained not by acceptance, but by the knowledge that rebellion invited destruction not just for oneself, but for loved ones as well. Some attempted resistance in small, desperate ways. Work slowed subtly. Tools broke unexpectedly. Illness was exaggerated. These acts were dangerous and often punished, but they represented refusal to surrender completely. Even the smallest assertion of will mattered. It reminded them they were still human, still capable of choice, however limited. The brothers' role in enforcing the system deepened the pain. Familiar faces delivering orders felt like betrayal layered upon cruelty. Appeals for mercy went unanswered. Where once there had been hesitation, there was now procedure. This transformation destroyed any remaining illusion that kindness might return. Authority had become faceless, even when carried by someone known. Nighttime offered little refuge. Dreams were haunted by fear, memories, and uncertainty. Mothers lay awake listening for footsteps. Fathers counted breaths, bracing for knocks at the door. Sleep became shallow, fragile, easily broken. Morning brought no relief, only another cycle of endurance. Yet through all of this, a quiet record was kept, not in ledgers, but in memory. Names remembered, wrongs remembered, stories passed down carefully, ensuring that truth survived even if justice did not. The mistress controlled documents and appearances, but she could not control remembrance. Pain carved its own archive into the hearts of those who suffered. The plantation functioned efficiently, just as she intended. Output increased, births were recorded, order was maintained. But beneath that order lay devastation that could not be measured in numbers. Lives diminished, futures narrowed, humanity reduced to survival. The cost of her system was paid daily by people who would never see its rewards. This silent suffering did not end with her lifetime. Trauma carried forward, shaping how people trusted, loved, and hoped. Even those who eventually escaped carried scars invisible to outsiders. The system she created extended beyond her control, leaving echoes long after her authority faded. In believing she had perfected domination, she overlooked a fundamental truth. Power can command bodies, but it cannot erase memory. The enslaved endured not because they accepted her vision, but because survival demanded endurance. Their suffering remained unseen by the world she curated, but it was real, vast, and lasting. And though they were denied justice in their time, their pain became part of a larger truth that history would eventually be forced to confront. When her life finally drew to a close, there were no public reckonings, no courtroom confessions, no dramatic collapse of power. She died as she had lived, wealthy, respected in certain circles, and shielded by the silence she had so carefully cultivated. To the outside world, her passing was marked by polite condolences and measured praise for her management and independence. Obituaries spoke of prosperity and discipline. Ledgers remained neatly kept. Land stayed productive for a time. It appeared on the surface that she had succeeded. But legacies are not preserved by numbers alone. In the years that followed, the plantation began to change. Ownership shifted. Records were scattered, sold, or deliberately destroyed. New hands tried to erase old practices, not out of compassion, but convenience. Yet something lingered in the soil, in the stories whispered by those who had survived her rule. Trauma does not disappear when authority ends. It migrates, embedding itself in memory, shaping generations long after the original oppressor is gone. Among the formerly enslaved and their descendants, her name did not fade into abstraction. It remained sharp, specific, heavy. Stories were told carefully, often without dates or official proof. but with emotional precision. Children learned early which names carried pain, which places held ghosts. These stories were not exaggerated myths, they were survival narratives passed down as warnings and truths. History lived in them even when history books remained silent. Her brothers too vanished into obscurity, their individual identities swallowed by the system they helped enforce. Whether they lived with regret or denial is unknown. What is known is that their silence became part of the damage. By choosing obedience over conscience, they ensured that their names would be remembered not for who they were, but for what they allowed. Complicity does not require enthusiasm, it only requires compliance. As time moved forward and slavery itself was challenged, dismantled, and condemned, the practices she once defended became symbols of horror. What she believed was innovation was later recognized as brutality stripped of disguise. Scholars, descendants, and communities began piecing together fragments, account books, oral histories, letters to understand how such cruelty could exist not just through violence, but through planning and intellect divorced from empathy. Her story stands as a warning about the dangers of unchecked power, especially when paired with intelligence and isolation. She was not chaotic, impulsive, or ignorant. She was deliberate, and that deliberateness is what makes her legacy so disturbing. Evil does not always shout. Sometimes it calculates quietly, convinces itself it is practical, and waits for silence to protect it. Yet this story is not hers alone. It belongs equally to those who endured her system and survived long enough for their truth to matter. It belongs to the mothers who protected hope in impossible conditions, to the fathers who endured humiliation to keep their families alive, to the children who learned resilience before they learned freedom. Their endurance outlived her authority. Their memories outlasted her wealth. History often remembers power more readily than pain, but pain has a way of resurfacing. It demands acknowledgement, it reshapes narratives, and in time it exposes the hollowness of legacies built on suffering. The plantation that once symbolized control eventually became just land. Her wealth dissolved into heirs and debts. Her influence ended. But the human cost remained, carved into generations that followed. This is why stories like this must be told, not to sensationalize cruelty, but to confront it. Silence protects oppression. Memory challenges it. By remembering, we honor those who were denied voice and dignity. By telling these stories, we refuse to let calculated cruelty be mistaken for strength or intelligence. And if you have listened this far, if the story has made you reflect, feel, or question, then the voices behind it have not been lost. From the bottom of our hearts, thank you for watching our video. If you found this story meaningful or important, please support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. Your support helps us continue telling stories that matter. Stay happy, spread happiness, and keep sharing kindness wherever you go. Thank you once again for your time and support.